In today's business world, being an average CEO is no longer an option. That's why we're committed to equipping you with the resources and the tactics necessary to not just survive, but to thrive. You're listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline podcast, where we are more than just a voice in the crowd.
Hi, everyone. We are here with Not Your Average CEO Lifeline. It is season 4, if you can believe it. 4 years with all of you. We know that we took a little bit of a break, which was much needed for Danielle and I, both in professional and personal growth. We've had a lot of things going on that have been very fantastic. So we appreciate you having patience with us that we took February through May off this year, but our podcast will be running June through December per normal. So we are looking to diving in with you on a lot of different topics this year. We have a great topic today talking about how to stop looking for a virtual assistant to do certain tasks for you. So we're going to kind of take a flip as to what not to do with your assistant and how to best delegate different tasks to the right people so that you can have less failure in what you're delegating and knowing you're giving it to the proper person. So with that said, Danielle, do you want to kickstart us on stop looking for a virtual assistant to do these things?
Yes, absolutely. So this seems like a pretty unlikely topic for the CEO and COO of a virtual assistant company to talk about, because it stands to reason that we would be talking about why you should hire a virtual assistant. And to be clear, we still think virtual assistants are a great option, but we've seen over our nearly 20 years in business, what we've done with clients and what we've heard from clients working with other companies. Sometimes folks are asking for virtual assistants that are things that are not ideal for a virtual assistant to do. And then that just leads to disappointment and frustration and the client feeling like they've wasted their money and they're not getting anywhere. And we want to prevent that from happening. So we're trying to talk about what VAs are and what they aren't. So a VA at their core is a support person. So someone that can help support you in getting your goals, execute a strategy, execute tasks for you, help keep you accountable, keep things moving along, and keep things running in the background. So for example, if you want to do social media for your business and it's something that makes sense for your business, your virtual assistant can be someone that is making the posts, checking out the analytics, seeing where the best times and days of the week are for you to post, checking where you get the most engagement, engaging your audience, responding to comments, keeping them talking about you, posting and editing reels, writing content, posting content, scheduling things out, monitoring your audience and kind of what they're talking about, looking at trends, that sort of thing. Those are all great things for a virtual assistant to do and execute on. However, that's usually when you already have the strategy. You already know that you want to do social media, that it makes sense for your business, and you have a strategic plan. Maybe that strategic plan came from a marketing consultant. Maybe it came from an OBM, an online business manager, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But there's sort of a demarcation there between what your virtual assistant can execute and support versus that high-level strategy. And so that's what we really want to identify here, is the difference between the two of those. We see people a lot of times mistaking a virtual assistant for someone that is a strategist or a high-level strategist or an OBM or a fixer. So my business isn't making any money. I think I can make money on social media. Fix that for me. And that will lead to a lot of disappointment. And Nicole will talk about some of that and some of the things that you shouldn't delegate now.
Thanks, Danielle. So as you were speaking, it kind of dawned on me that our listeners may not know what they don't know about fractional support and who else is out there to help them. So I want to touch on that a little bit, right there. You may be looking for a virtual assistant, but not understand that there are fractional services outside of a business coach, right? You may think that, oh, I either have to hire a marketing company or I have to have a business coach and then a VA. There are a lot of options in between, such as a fractional CMO or an accountant, or as Danielle said, a marketing consultant. So really know your options for the in-between when you are looking for this person to fill whatever void it may be, whether it's strategy, is it a fixer or a doer. You have to really know before you seek out this person and what avenues to go. So I would say take that step first before you just default to a virtual assistant, because virtual assisting has become this large oversight of, oh, I'll just get a virtual assistant to do it. But not having the plan in place is going to be difficult. So hire with intention, whether it's an employee or a contractor, and know why you're hiring them. So, there are a lot of myths surrounding virtual assistants. They can be the super doer of everything, which can be true in some sense, right, Danielle? Like they can be a salesperson and they can also be your bookkeeper. But it is the level at which they're capable of doing those things, and not expecting a virtual assistant then to do all of your sales. You can give them a script to read. You can give them a process to follow, but knowing that you're giving it with intention is key. Danielle, do you see a lot of times people talking about the super VA who can do everything? They're the unicorn and they can do sales versus they can do my marketing, and that's the expectation you think every virtual assistant can have?
Yes. And I think when it comes to sales, for example, a virtual assistant can help you develop a list of leads. They can do lead generation. They can research your prospects and give you a piece of paper that says, Nicole, the COO of Virtual Assist USA, is your prospect, and here's where she went to school, and here are the things that she's up to, and here's her recent podcast. And that's great for when you're doing sales and having those conversations. They can help you develop follow-up strategies. They can write the content, make sure that you're entering them in your CRM properly, setting up your CRM, making sure that they're in a drip campaign. But actually doing those calls and having those conversations needs to come from someone that is a salesperson, or maybe it comes from you directly as the CEO. So you can have someone support you in that sales role, but unless you're hiring a salesperson, that's not what you want to hire a virtual assistant for. There's a few other things that we would say you don't want to hire a virtual assistant for. So that would be your business strategy. So developing your strategy, your 5-year plan, any kind of big picture decisions. Now, certainly your virtual assistant becomes someone that is a trusted partner. You're speaking to them on a regular basis, maybe even a daily basis. And so you might say to them, I'm planning on doing this. How do you think our audience or our target market would respond? And that's certainly a conversation that you can have, and a virtual assistant would welcome that. But it's not something that you should be relying on your virtual assistant to do that for you. Also things like revenue generation, especially that are related to sales. So again, having a virtual assistant support you in your sales strategy, but not being directly responsible for, we need to get $10,000 in revenue this week. Managing other team members. So that would definitely be something for a OBM, an online business manager, to do. That's the perfect task for them. But your virtual assistant themselves should not be managing other team members. That wouldn't be, within their skill set. And then finally, creating those core offers and messaging. So again, you can certainly ask your virtual assistant, hey, you do the social media, you see what our audience is talking about. Do you think they would go for this? Do you think there's any tweaks? But actually developing that messaging, that would be something that would be coming from you, coming from your OBM, coming from a CMO, as Nicole mentioned, coming from someone else. So again, thinking of that role as a support role versus an executive or execution role.
I sometimes see that there it flows over, right? A virtual assistant may flow over into those areas because you're having a conversation and you're wanting their opinion and you're valuing more from them. But it's always important to take that step back and look at role profiles, remember the expectations, so that when you ask them those questions that are a little higher level and you're looking for feedback, you don't overdo it or over get excited that, oh my gosh, maybe my VA can provide me with different insight, right? Because you may set a different expectation moving forward that the VA may not be comfortable with. And they may think they have the skills and training, and maybe they do, but assessing the skills needed to take those higher steps is going to be important. So, Danielle, being in a CEO seat, you have delegated a lot of work over the course of 20 years, as have I. We do it on a regular basis. So tallying up those numbers would be very large of how much stuff we've delegated out. Can you give a time that you delegated something and it totally backfired on you? And if you want me to go first, I have something in mind. But
yeah, go ahead and go first while I sort of dig for.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it from the sense of trying to elevate a VA that didn't have the skill sets for a leadership role. This is something that I've seen regularly in trying to delegate out a virtual assistant who seemed to have potential to lead others, but without knowing their DISC assessment, without knowing their Kolbe, without knowing their strengths, taking into consideration their resume, right? They've been with me for a while and I'm looking for them. I see potential to be a leader and delegating that out. Can you talk to team members? Can you send out this survey and let me know what other team members are thinking, right? And in what would be an OBM type role where I'm looking for them to manage the team and provide leadership feedback. Backfiring being that person did not have the interpersonal skills or the follow through to do a role like that. And relying more on feeling that, oh my gosh, this person is a great VA. We communicate so well. The team should communicate just as well with this person. And fault being delegating it out totally backfired because while, of course, I did some training, it was not going to align no matter what because of their work style, because of their personality fit. It's not something that they were comfortable with in a long-term scenario. So that's the case where, right, I felt, oh my gosh, this VA is perfect. They align with everything. They understand the business. They understand how to delegate, how to talk with clients, but trying to transition them into a leadership level role without doing my homework really backfired for me. Did you agree?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And can you share a little bit more with the audience? You mentioned DISC assessments and Kolbe and why that matters, because I also think that might be something that folks don't necessarily know a lot about.
Yeah. And we talked about this in a lot of our other podcast episodes. So if you're listening and you want to dive a little deeper, there are a couple of episodes that go into it, but DISC, Kolbe, Myers-Briggs, whatever you may be familiar with, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. You're going to take the assessment and they're going to spit back out what your personality fit may be. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Where are you comfortable? And they're all a little different. So DISC is by far my preference, Kolbe being the second, but DISC is going to look at, are you detail oriented? Are you a visionary? Are you more geared towards a CEO, or are you more geared towards someone who likes to talk to people? Where Kolbe is going to give you more, what's your follow through like? Are you proactive? And kind of give those different situations. So they're a little bit different. There are other things like strength finders. They'll tell you, are you a connector? Are you an achiever? What is your personal way of working, whether it's personal or professional? But the point is to understand what you're looking for with those. I prefer DISC because DISC gives you a natural versus adapted style. So what is your natural style? Me, I'm naturally detail oriented. My adapted style, when I'm stressed, my detail orientation goes up, right? And that makes sense. I'm stressed. I want to make sure that everything is in line. I'm following all the details. I'm not missing anything. So when you look at DISC, if things are off, say I'm a detail-oriented person, naturally my adapted style, when I'm stressed, all of my levels, my assessment numbers tank to 0. That would indicate that I have no ability in my stressed environment to handle a stressed environment. So when you interview someone, there's always that white knuckle syndrome, right? They could have a fantastic interview, which is why when you're interviewing, you want to rely on 3 different things. You want to rely on their resume, their assessment, and their interview to make a complete assessment and conclusion on a person. But knowing what their assessment is, knowing what their strengths are, if you're looking for a virtual assistant to do data entry, they're going to want to be a detail-oriented VA. So you're going to want to give that assessment. If you are looking for a VA to do sales or marketing or anything that's maybe customer service, just getting on the phone, you're going to want to look for in their assessment, someone that is naturally has these well interpersonal skills. They can talk, and they're not going to be met with all these necessary details to talk with your customers. So that's really the importance of assessments, a little bit about assessments. Danielle, did I miss any aspects of DISC, Colby, all the above?
No, I don't think so at all. No, not at all. That was perfect. I wanted to talk about, we were talking about sort of wild requests that we've heard for delegation. And a recent one came to mind, and it's what prompted the idea for this podcast for Nicole and I. Someone was asking for a virtual assistant to be a grant writer for them. And that is a clear delineation that something a virtual assistant cannot do. However, if you are in a business, a nonprofit, where grant writing is part of what you do, it's how you generate revenue, there are certainly things that a virtual assistant can do. So a better solution there would have been for the company, the nonprofit, to hire a grant writer. So someone that specifically has experience in grant writing. I'll be the bearer of bad news. That is going to be more expensive than a virtual assistant. But again, it's where you want to spend your money. That's something that is driving revenue for you. It's important. But there's still an opportunity to use a virtual assistant with that. So a virtual assistant can help research the grants, can help with the proofreading of the grants. They can help managing the send out of the grants. So managing the deadlines, which is really crucial in something like that, sort of shepherding the application through the process. The virtual assistant can also help doing any research that's needed for the grant. So maybe that's also developing graphs and charts, inputting data, gathering information about other grants or other nonprofits in the area, developing all of that and giving that to the grant writer to make their job easier, hopefully make it a little cheaper for them to do it for you. And again, inputting all that information, but actually writing the grant would be a perfect example of something that an actual grant writer should be doing. It doesn't mean that you can't utilize a virtual assistant and still be able to work with them. But that was a great example for Nicole and I that we thought, hey, we should really do a podcast about this, because this is something that maybe people don't know or aren't thinking of. So we wanted to make sure that we shared that example with you all.
Working with 2 nonprofit boards, I see that a lot. So I think our listeners are going to enjoy this example. Another one that, before we wrap up, another one Danielle and I want to talk about is bookkeeping. So anything that comes to finance is really a big ticket item. We've seen in the VA world, in the fractional world, just in general, surrounding who can help me with finances and who's the right person. So through Virtual Assist USA, we see this probably with almost every client. How can my VA help with bookkeeping? And they can certainly help with reconciliation, invoicing, making sure invoices are coming in deadlines, or creating invoices. But in the sense of providing financial advice, when it comes to legal advice, taxes, those need to be directed towards the specialty. And it can get pretty confusing what an accountant should advise you on versus a CFO should advise you on versus maybe an attorney that you need to talk to. So being mindful that when it comes to finances, and it's always a touchy subject, I think, for a lot of clients, especially if they don't already have a finance team in place. If you just maybe have an overarching bookkeeper and you feel like things are falling through the cracks, get feedback from your bookkeeper, right? Start there. Start where you are having issues and where you can provide feedback from your team to then move forward. Does the bookkeeper need a VA support? Or does the bookkeeper need an accountant support? Do they need a CFO? So this is a really big ticket item that we see. And I would say if it's the wildest request, we're saying we've had clients asking our VAs essentially to do CFO work, right? Can you tell me how we can get to 2 million in revenue this year, right? That is completely on the opposite end of the spectrum of a virtual assistant. So really be cognizant of what you're asking from your team members, I think, is the moral of this story for today's episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like we said, this was a little bit off the rails because you would expect us to talk about why you should use a virtual assistant. And we still think you should, obviously. And it's very important just to know what makes sense to delegate, what doesn't make sense to delegate, and to whom. And it's going to make the biggest difference for you financially. You're not going to waste any of the time and money hiring someone that's just not going to get you the results that you need, and you feel like you're barking up the wrong tree, you're on a hamster wheel, it's just not getting anywhere. But once you know what to delegate and to whom to delegate, that's what's going to make all the difference in your business. And certainly it's something that you should ask your virtual assistant. If you don't know, just trust that you're going to ask your virtual assistant and they can direct you and say, this isn't really my wheelhouse. It would be better given to an OBM.
But you have to preface it, right? You have to start off by saying, I'm looking for your feedback. Yes. Is this something in your wheelhouse, right? You can't just don't assume. They may be nervous, right? Especially virtual assistants. Most of them are at an entry level to the business world. Even if they've been a virtual assistant for, say, 20 years, they may not have seen all of the things necessary required to, say, grow or scale a business. So don't just assume, set those expectations, voice them. That's regardless if it's a virtual assistant, any part of your business, you should be voicing what your expectations are, what you want people to be accountable for. That way you're not hitting unknown roadblocks and you're not frustrated. Danielle said, like, spinning that wheel. You really need to be clear in your messaging and document things. Don't just say, like, oh, I said it out loud one time, put it in writing, right? Document it. Let's revert back to a living document. That way you have some process and order to who, what, where, when, why, how.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
Any last minute thoughts, Danielle, before last minute words of wisdom on our episode of being bold on what not to delegate to a virtual assistant and who to delegate things to?
Yeah, I think that there is a myth about virtual assistants that, Nicole, you mentioned earlier, this super VA or this unicorn VA. And if you've heard that from folks, they're probably not being completely honest. Mm-hmm. It's probably not actually what happened.
Yeah.
I would be very weary as a business owner if I was talking with someone and they said, I had a virtual assistant prepare my taxes for me. You might have a virtual assistant do your reconciliations, prepare your books to give them to a CPA. And then the CPA very likely will charge you less money because they found that everything's already done and they don't have to dig through things. But still, if you're hearing things like that, my virtual assistant did my taxes, I would be very wary of that.
Big red flags. Big red flags.
Big red flags would go up for that. So just be cautious of that and be practical. Use common sense. Think about what a virtual assistant is qualified to do and where they can really help you.
I want to also talk about, you hit a trigger point for me, that your virtual assistant may not be the only person working on your account, depending on where you're finding a virtual assistant. Mm-hmm. So if you have, in the example that Danielle said, my virtual assistant did my taxes, if you're working with an agency, you may have one person that you think is working on your stuff all the time, but really they're offshoring or outsourcing all of this other work. So understanding that you may think you have a super VA or this unicorn VA, but really you're not seeing whatever may be going on. And just Danielle and I being in this industry for so long and knowing how we operate, we are very transparent that we operate as a team, that all of our VAs are located in the USA. And if you're working with a team member, you'll know the other team member that comes on to your account. But we know that might not be, whether it's another virtual assistant agency or if you're hiring a virtual assistant that's a contractor, you may not have visibility to what is going on behind the scenes. So being mindful that you may think you found this unicorn VA, but asking the question of, are they having help from someone else to execute your work is going to be really important. If you think you found this one super VA to do everything within your business. Right. Thank you all for listening to our episode. We look forward to season 4.
You've been listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline with your hosts Danielle Cuomo, CEO, and Nicole Els, COO. This podcast has been sponsored by Virtual Assist USA. If you'd like to know more about the hosts or exploring virtual assistant services, visit virtualassistusa.com for more information.